Most Americans know the legends of Lewis and Clark, the Pilgrims at Plymouth, and the Founding Fathers in Philadelphia. But almost no one knows that the first great explorer to walk across the future United States, surviving shipwrecks, slavery, starvation, and hostile empires, was a dark-skinned North African man whose name appears in only a few faded pages of history. He crossed swamps filled with alligators, mountains no European had ever seen, deserts that swallowed entire expeditions, and indigenous nations whose languages he'd never heard. Yet they welcomed him not as a conqueror, but as a healer, a miracle worker, and later, a legend. His name was Estebanico, also known as Estebanico the Moor, and his story is so unbelievable that for centuries historians doubted it could be real. But it is real, and it's time to tell it.
The Boy from Azamor. The town of Azamor, along the Atlantic coast of present-day Morocco, smelled of salt, leather, and wet earth on the morning Estebanico was born. It sat on the banks of the Arabiya River, a place where fishermen tied their boats to sun-bleached posts, where traders from the Sahara brought camels loaded with ivory and gold dust, and where rumors from across the ocean drifted like foam on the tide. Azamor was not a grand city like Fez or Marrakesh. It lacked towering minarets or palaces of marble. But it had something else, something Estebanico would later realize prepared him for the unimaginable. It was a crossroads. Berbers, Arabs, Jews, Iberians, black Africans, and desert nomads all collided here. Their languages mixed in the markets, their flavors in the food, their arguments in the streets. Young boys like Estebanico learned to listen first, speak second, and observe always. He was born around 1500, just as the world was exploding outward. Columbus had already sailed. Portuguese ships were raiding the Atlantic coast for slaves. Spain was inching toward global empire. Morocco itself was fracturing, squeezed between European powers and rival sultanates. Estebanico likely never imagined that these forces would someday drag him thousands of miles from home. As a child, he ran barefoot along the riverbanks, climbed fig trees, and watched the tide roll in like any other boy. Yet even then, he had a strange talent. He remembered everything people said. Words stuck to him like seeds in a traveler's cloak. Snatches of Portuguese, bits of Spanish, the clipped Arabic of traders, the melodic Tamazight to Berber families, it all soaked into his mind effortlessly. And even more unusually, he could mimic accents so perfectly that adults sometimes turned to look, thinking a foreigner had spoken. No one knew it yet, but this gift would someday save his life again and again, across lands no men from his world had ever heard of.
Around 1513, when Estebanico was still a young teenager, the world came crashing down. Portugal, hungry for control of Morocco's Atlantic ports, launched a brutal campaign. Their target was Azamor. Cannons boomed, walls shattered, and the town that had felt eternal suddenly shook beneath Estebanico's feet. He saw chaos, families fleeing, soldiers charging, smoke swallowing the sky. The Portuguese captured the city and demanded tribute. When the money did not arrive quickly enough, they seized people instead. Men, women, children. Estebanico was one of them. Dragged in chains with dozens of others, he boarded a Portuguese ship bound for Europe. The vessel smelled of salt and sickness. Rats scurried underfoot, waves slammed the hull like fists. Estebanico clung to the memory of Azamor's warm riverbanks, but the truth settled into him as heavy as the iron around his wrists. His life as a free boy was over.
Sold in Seville. Portugal and Spain were unified under one crown at the time. forming a tangled empire that stretched across Europe and the newly conquered Americas. In the bustling port city of Seville, enslaved Africans were bought and sold daily. Estebanico stood on one of those auction blocks, tall for his age, strong, with a steady gaze that caught the attention of wealthy Spaniards. One of them was Andres Dorantes de Carranza, a nobleman preparing to join a massive expedition to conquer lands in the New World. Dorantes needed servants who could withstand hardship, learn quickly, and obey. Something about Estebanico impressed him. Perhaps it was the boy's composure. Perhaps his ability to mimic the Spanish words he heard. Perhaps fate. Dorantes bought him. And just like that, Estebanico's life veered into history's shadows, toward an expedition so cursed and disastrous that only 4 of 600 men would survive. One of them would be him.
The doomed Armada of Panfilo de Narvaez. In 1527, Spain launched one of the largest expeditions ever sent to the Americas. 5 ships, 600 men, dozens of horses, supplies for a year. Their mission? Claim the vast territory of La Florida, expand the empire, and find gold. Gold. Always gold. Estebanico served Dorantes aboard the flagship, surrounded by men who believed they were the masters of the world. Soldiers, priests, aristocrats, sailors hardened by storms. They looked at the dark-skinned Moroccan youth with a mixture of arrogance and curiosity. They did not know they would one day depend on him for survival. The voyage was cursed from the start. Storms tore sails. Disease spread in the cramped quarters. One ship was lost before they even reached the Caribbean, and when they finally landed near present-day Tampa Bay in 1528, they realized 2 terrible things. 1, the maps were wrong. 2, there was no gold. What followed was one of the most catastrophic expeditions in world history. A hurricane destroyed their ships. Starvation forced them to eat their horses. Battles with indigenous nations wiped out entire squads. Desperation pushed them to build crude rafts to escape. Hundreds died. But Estebanico lived. Castaways on an unknown land. After being blown across the Gulf of Mexico, the survivors, fewer than 80, washed ashore on an island near modern-day Texas. They were half mad from hunger. The rafts had splintered. Men had drowned before their eyes. Some had gone insane. Naked, freezing, starved, and surrounded by unfamiliar tribes, the castaways realized with horror. No one knew where they were. No one was coming to save them. Among the survivors were Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, the treasurer and future chronicler, Andrés Dorantes, Estebanico's master, Alonso del Castillo, another nobleman, and Estebanico, the enslaved Moroccan who would eventually lead them. Most of the others would soon die. Yet this is where Estebanico's story truly begins. Because unlike the Spaniards, he adapted.
The transformation of Estebanico. For years, the castaways lived among indigenous nations along the Gulf Coast. Many Spaniards died of starvation, disease, or exhaustion. Those who survived learned to live as indigenous people did. But Estebanico went further. He learned new languages quickly. Karankawa, Coaltecan, and others, mastering gestures, signs, and dialects even his Spanish companions could not comprehend. He became a trader, a mediator between tribes, a man who walked freely where Spaniards would have been killed instantly. His charisma startled the Spaniards. He told stories, made people laugh, eased conflicts. Most astonishing of all, he displayed a gift that would shape the legend that followed him. He became a healer. Indigenous families brought their sick to him. He prayed over them, touched their brows, whispered words from sermons he had once heard on the ship. Many recovered. Was it chance? Coincidence? Skill? Faith? It didn't matter. To the tribes, Estebanico was not a slave. He was a man touched by power. Over time, he became their guide, their negotiator, their diplomat. When the 4 remaining survivors finally decided to trek thousands of miles west, across Texas, across the Rio Grande, across Chihuahua Desert, across mountains and plains to reach Spanish settlements in Mexico, Estebanico walked at the front, not behind, not as a servant, as a leader. Across a continent no European had ever seen. Their walk across the continent lasted nearly 8 years. They saw buffalo long before any European wrote of them. They crossed deserts where cracked earth sliced their feet. They walked through snow with no shoes, through cactus forests that tore their clothes, across rivers swollen with spring floodwaters. They met dozens of indigenous nations, each with its own customs, languages, and beliefs. And everywhere they went, people recognized Estebanico as a healer, a holy man, a traveler of power. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, followed him. The 3 Spaniards, Cabeza de Vaca, Dorantes, and Castillo, were taken aback. They had expected to guide him. Instead, America followed him. When they finally reached Spanish territory in 1536, soldiers stared in disbelief. The castaways arrived dressed like indigenous shamans, surrounded by admirers, carrying no weapons, no armor, no riches, yet possessing knowledge worth more than gold. The first human account of the North American interior. And the one who understood the land best was not the nobleman. It was Estebanico.